My family stole my inheritance, but Grandma had the last laugh. I never thought I'd be writing this story, but after everything that happened, I feel like I need to share how my own family tried to screw me over and how my sweet grandma, even from beyond the grave, made sure justice was served. It all started 3 years ago when my grandma's health began to decline. At 87, she had lived a full life, but seeing her fade away was heartbreaking for everyone. Well, almost everyone. You see, I was always Grandma's favorite, not because she played favorites, but because I was the only one who seemed to genuinely care about her company without expecting anything in return. My older brother and sister only showed up when they needed money or wanted to impress her with their latest business ventures that always seemed to flop. Meanwhile, I spent every Sunday with Grandma, helping around her house, listening to her stories, and learning her famous recipes. Grandma was a formidable woman. Widowed at 45 with 3 children to raise, she built a small real estate empire from nothing. By the time she passed, she owned multiple properties across 3 states, had a substantial investment portfolio, and possessed assets worth millions. She never flaunted her wealth, driving the same 1998 Toyota Camry until the day she died, and living modestly in the same suburban home she'd bought in the 70s. As her health deteriorated, my older brother and sister's visits became more frequent. Suddenly, they were the concerned grandchildren, bringing expensive gifts they couldn't afford and making grand promises about how they'd take care of her. Grandma saw right through it, but she was too kind to call them out. I noticed her watching them with a knowing sadness in her eyes during these visits. During one of our last private conversations, Grandma squeezed my hand and told me she had taken care of everything. She said some people show their true colors when money is involved, and she wanted to make sure those who truly loved her would be protected. I didn't think much of it then, just assuming she meant her will was straightforward and fair. 3 months later, Grandma passed peacefully in her sleep. The funeral was a spectacle of fake tears from my older brother and sister, who sobbed dramatically about how much they'd miss her. I stood by quietly, genuinely grieving the woman who had been my best friend and confidant. The following week, we all gathered at the lawyer's office for the reading of the will. Her attorney for over 30 years seemed uncomfortable as he adjusted his glasses and cleared his throat repeatedly. I should have known something was wrong right then, but I was still too lost in my grief to pay attention to the warning signs. As the lawyer began reading, I discovered that Grandma had left her estate to be divided equally among her 3 grandchildren. At first, I felt relief that she had been fair to everyone. But then the lawyer read the addendum dated just 2 weeks before her death. This addendum, signed by Grandma and witnessed by a nurse, changed everything. According to this new document, my older brother and sister would receive their portions immediately, while my share would be held in a trust with specific conditions. The conditions seemed impossible to meet, essentially ensuring I would receive nothing unless I completed a series of bizarre tasks within an impossible time frame. My older brother and sister exchanged triumphant glances as the lawyer explained the terms. I sat in stunned silence, unable to comprehend how Grandma could have done this to me. The woman who had always told me I was the one who truly understood her had apparently cut me out of her will at the last moment. That night, as I sat alone in my small apartment, surrounded by boxes of Grandma's personal belongings that no one else had wanted, I noticed something peculiar. Tucked inside her favorite recipe book was a small envelope with my name on it in Grandma's distinctive handwriting. Inside was a single key and a note that would change everything. The note from Grandma was simple but cryptic. It read, "My dear, not everything is as it seems. When the time is right, use this key to open the safety deposit box at First National Bank, Box 7B. Trust in your grandmother's love." I stared at the note for hours that night, trying to make sense of it. Was this some kind of test? Had Grandma really left me nothing in her will, only to leave me this mysterious key and note? Or was there something more going on? The next morning, I called First National Bank and confirmed that Grandma did indeed have a safety deposit box, and that I was listed as an authorized access person. The bank manager seemed surprised when I mentioned Box 7B, as if it held some significance. When I arrived at the bank, I was escorted to a private room where the safety deposit box was brought to me. My hands trembled as I inserted the key and turned it. Inside, I found not cash or jewelry, but a thick envelope containing documents and another smaller envelope. The documents were copies of Grandma's original will, dated 6 months before her death. In this version, her estate was to be divided equally among all 3 grandchildren, with no strange conditions or trusts. There was also a letter from Grandma to her lawyer expressing concern that my older brother and sister might try to manipulate her in her final days. But what caught my attention was the smaller envelope, which contained a single sheet of paper with what appeared to be some kind of code or puzzle. At the bottom of the page was a handwritten note from Grandma. They think they've won, but the game has just begun. Follow these clues carefully, and all that is yours will be restored. Remember our Sunday conversations. I left the bank more confused than ever. What did Grandma mean by "the game has just begun"? And what did she want me to remember about our Sunday conversations? Meanwhile, my older brother and sister were living it up. They had already accessed their inheritances and were making extravagant purchases. My brother bought a brand new luxury car and was planning a trip to Europe, while my sister was putting a down payment on a fancy condo in the city's trendiest neighborhood. 2 weeks after Grandma's passing, we all met again with the lawyer to finalize the estate distribution. My older brother and sister were smug and condescending, making snide remarks about how I should have visited Grandma more often or tried harder to impress her. I bit my tongue, remembering the key and the safety deposit box. As we were leaving the lawyer's office, the lawyer pulled me aside. He looked uncomfortable and kept glancing around as if someone might be watching. "I need to tell you something," he said quietly. "Your grandmother was very concerned about your siblings in her final days. She mentioned they had been pressuring her to change her will, even bringing in another lawyer to draft a new document." I nodded, not revealing what I already knew. "Look," he continued, "I shouldn't be telling you this, but your grandmother was a very smart woman. She always said that the true measure of a person's character is how they behave when they think no one is watching. She also believed in poetic justice." With that cryptic statement, he handed me a business card. "If you need help interpreting any legal documents, give me a call. Your grandmother was very specific that I should remain available to you." That evening, as I sat in my apartment trying to decipher the code from the safety deposit box, I received a text from my sister. It was a picture of her and my brother at an expensive restaurant, raising glasses in what appeared to be a toast. The caption read, "Celebrating our good fortune. Too bad some people aren't as lucky. Hashtag family, inheritance, blessed." I felt a surge of anger, but forced myself to focus on Grandma's puzzle. As I studied the code, I noticed something familiar about certain numbers and phrases. They reminded me of conversations Grandma and I had during our Sunday visits, references to old movies we watched together, inside jokes about her neighbors, and memories from my childhood. Suddenly, a piece of the puzzle clicked into place. The code wasn't just random, it was a series of references to our shared memories. As I began to decode it, I realized Grandma had left me a trail of breadcrumbs that would lead me to something much bigger than I had imagined. The first clue in Grandma's puzzle led me to the public library, a place we had visited often during my childhood.
She had taught me to read there, and we had spent countless hours in the local history section learning about our town's past. According to the decoded message, I needed to find a specific book, Gardening in the Midwest, and look for a bookmark on page 47. The next day, I took the bus to the library, my heart pounding with anticipation. When I found the book, I discovered not just a bookmark, but a small key taped to the back of it, along with another note from Grandma. "My dear," the note read, "by now you've probably realized that the will read at the lawyer's office was not your grandmother's true intention. Your older brother and sister managed to manipulate me when I was at my weakest, but I always planned for this possibility. This key will open a post office box where you'll find the next set of instructions. Remember how we used to play treasure hunts when you were little? Consider this our final treasure hunt together." I couldn't help but smile through my tears. Grandma had always been clever, but I never imagined she would go to such lengths to protect me from my siblings' greed. The post office box contained another puzzle, this one leading me to a storage unit across town. When I opened it, I found boxes filled with Grandma's personal documents, including financial statements, property deeds, and something that made my heart stop, a video recording labeled "For Your Eyes Only." I rushed home to watch the video, my hands trembling as I inserted the disc into my laptop. There was Grandma, looking frail but determined, sitting in her favorite armchair. "My dear," she began, "if you're watching this, it means I'm gone, and things have probably not gone as planned. I need to explain everything." She went on to describe how my older brother and sister had brought in a new lawyer when they realized she was planning to divide her estate equally. They had convinced her that I was financially irresponsible and would squander my inheritance, preying on her weakened state and love for them. "I played along with their game," Grandma continued, "but I made sure to protect what is rightfully yours. The will they had me sign is indeed valid, but what they don't know is that I created a separate, irrevocable trust that supersedes the will. This trust contains the bulk of my assets, and it can only be accessed by completing the treasure hunt I've laid out for you." She explained that the conditions in the will, the impossible tasks and time frame, were designed to be a distraction. While my older brother and sister thought they had won, the real inheritance was waiting for me to claim it. "The final piece of the puzzle," Grandma said, her eyes twinkling, "is hidden in plain sight, in a place that holds special meaning for both of us. Remember our last conversation about family heirlooms and how they're not always what they seem?" The video ended with Grandma blowing a kiss to the camera. I sat in stunned silence, trying to process everything. My grandmother had outsmarted my siblings, even as they thought they were taking advantage of her. Over the next few weeks, I followed Grandma's trail of clues, each one leading me closer to the truth. Meanwhile, my older brother and sister's behavior grew increasingly outrageous. They posted photos of their lavish lifestyle on social media, tagging me in posts with captions like, "Thinking of family today, so grateful for Grandma's generosity." The passive-aggressive jabs were impossible to miss. What they didn't realize was that with each extravagant purchase, they were drawing attention to themselves. The new car, the expensive condo, the luxury vacations, all purchased within weeks of Grandma's passing. It was the kind of behavior that would raise eyebrows, especially given that Grandma had always been so private about her wealth. As I neared the end of Grandma's treasure hunt, I began to piece together her final plan. She hadn't just left me an inheritance, she had left me a way to expose my siblings' greed and ensure they faced consequences for their actions. The final clue in Grandma's treasure hunt led me to her favorite antique shop, a place we had visited many times over the years. The owner had known Grandma for decades and greeted me with a warm hug when I arrived. "Your grandmother told me you might be coming," she said with a knowing smile. "She left something for you here." From behind the counter, she produced a small, ornate wooden box, the kind Grandma had always admired for its craftsmanship. Inside was a key and a letter. "My dear," the letter read, "by now you've probably figured out that I've left you more than just an inheritance. I've left you a way to restore balance to our family. The key in this box opens a safe deposit box at a different bank, one your siblings don't know about. Inside, you'll find the final piece of our puzzle." The next day, I visited the second bank and accessed the safe deposit box. Inside was a portfolio of documents that made my jaw drop. Grandma had created a comprehensive trust that contained not just the bulk of her financial assets, but also properties that weren't mentioned in the will my older brother and sister had manipulated. But what was truly brilliant was the clause she had included. The trust specified that if any beneficiary attempted to manipulate or defraud other beneficiaries regarding the estate, that person's share would be redistributed among the remaining beneficiaries. And Grandma had included evidence, recordings, emails, and witness statements proving that my older brother and sister had indeed manipulated her will. There was also a letter from Grandma explaining her reasoning. "My dear," she wrote, "I know this seems elaborate, but I needed to ensure that your siblings couldn't take advantage of you or me. I've always believed in fairness, but I also believe in consequences. The trust I've created will provide you with financial security, but more importantly, it will ensure that your older brother and sister face the consequences of their actions. She went on to explain that she had instructed her attorney to wait 3 months after her passing before releasing the trust documents to me, giving her grandchildren time to reveal their true characters. I hope, she concluded, that you'll use these resources not just for your own benefit, but to honor the values I've tried to instill in all my grandchildren. Remember that wealth means nothing without integrity, and family means nothing without trust. Armed with this new information, I contacted Grandma's original attorney. He wasn't surprised to hear from me. "Your grandmother was a remarkable woman," he said when we met. "She anticipated that your older brother and sister might try something like this. That's why she created the trust as a backup plan." He explained that the trust was irrevocable and superseded the will. In other words, Grandma's true intentions would prevail, and my older brother and sister would face legal consequences for their actions. "What should I do?" I asked, feeling overwhelmed. "First," the attorney said, "we need to document everything. The purchases your older brother and sister have made, the social media posts, the conversations they've had with you, all of this will be relevant when we present the trust to the court." Over the next few weeks, I gathered evidence of my siblings' behavior. I saved their social media posts, recorded conversations when they bragged about their good fortune, and even managed to obtain copies of the extravagant purchases they had made. Meanwhile, I continued to play the part of the disinherited grandchild, showing up at family gatherings with a sad expression and letting my older brother and sister believe they had won. Their condescension grew with each meeting, as did my resolve to see Grandma's plan through. The breaking point came at what would have been Grandma's 88th birthday. We had agreed to gather at her favorite restaurant for a memorial dinner. My older brother and sister arrived late, dressed in expensive new outfits and dripping with jewelry they couldn't have afforded before Grandma's passing. "It's a shame Grandma couldn't be here to see how well we're doing," my brother said loudly, causing other diners to glance our way. "She always wanted us to be successful." My sister chimed in, "Yes, and it's too bad some people didn't appreciate her as much as we did, but I guess that's how things go sometimes." I excused myself to the restroom, where I took a moment to compose myself. When I returned, I found the attorney waiting at our table. "I'm glad I caught you," he said, nodding at my siblings. "I need to discuss some matters regarding your grandmother's estate." My older brother and sister exchanged nervous glances. But the attorney remained calm. "I think it's time we cleared up some misconceptions about your grandmother's final wishes," he said, opening his briefcase. "And I believe you'll all find this information quite illuminating." The restaurant seemed to grow quiet as the attorney laid out the documents on the table. My older brother and sister leaned forward, their expressions shifting from confusion to concern as they began to realize what was happening. "As you know," the attorney began, "your grandmother revised her will shortly before her passing. However, what you may not know is that she also created an irrevocable trust that supersedes the will." He slid copies of the trust documents across the table. I watched as my siblings' faces paled when they read the contents, the clause about beneficiaries who attempted to defraud others, the evidence of their manipulation, and the redistribution of assets. "This can't be legal," my brother sputtered, his face turning red. "We had a lawyer present when Grandma signed the new will." "Indeed," the attorney replied calmly, "and that lawyer is now under investigation for exploiting an elderly client. Your grandmother was quite thorough in documenting her concerns about his behavior." My sister's eyes darted around the restaurant as if looking for an escape route. "There must be some mistake. Grandma loved us equally. She would never have done this." "On the contrary," the attorney said, pushing forward a stack of emails and letters. "Your grandmother was quite explicit about her concerns regarding both of you. She documented instances where you pressured her for money, brought in unscrupulous lawyers, and made false statements about you to gain her favor." I remained silent as my siblings sputtered denials and excuses. Everything Grandma had predicted was happening exactly as she had said it would. They were revealing their true characters in the most public way possible. The trust is quite clear, the attorney continued, ignoring their protests. Any beneficiary found to have manipulated the estate will forfeit their share, which will be redistributed among the remaining beneficiaries. In this case, that means you will receive the entire estate. My brother slammed his hand on the table, causing nearby diners to jump. This is ridiculous. We'll fight this in court. You're welcome to do so, the attorney replied, unfazed. But I should warn you that your grandmother anticipated this possibility. She included not only written evidence, but also video recordings of her expressing her true wishes, as well as witness statements from the nursing staff who cared for her in her final days. He paused, letting his words sink in. Furthermore, the trust specifies that any legal challenges will be funded from the assets of the challenging parties. In other words, if you choose to fight this, you'll be using your own money that will eventually go to you anyway. The color drained from my sister's face. So we get nothing? Not exactly, the attorney said. The trust provides a modest inheritance for each of you, enough to live comfortably but not extravagantly. The bulk of Grandma's assets, however, will go to you, as she intended. I could see the calculations running through my siblings' minds. They had already spent a significant portion of what they believed was their inheritance on luxury items and experiences. The realization that they would need to return most of it while I would receive everything Grandma had truly intended for me was devastating. What about the things we already bought? My brother asked, his voice barely a whisper. Those will need to be returned or sold, the attorney replied. The trust includes provisions for recovering assets that were purchased based on the fraudulent will.
You have 30 days to liquidate these purchases and return the funds to the estate. My sister looked like she might be sick. But the condo, I already signed the papers. Then you'll need to find a way out of the contract, the attorney said sympathetically. Your grandmother was very specific about this. She believed that true character is revealed when people face consequences for their actions. As we left the restaurant, my older brother and sister walked several paces behind me, their earlier bravado completely gone. They had arrived expecting to celebrate their good fortune at my expense. They were leaving with the realization that their greed had cost them everything. That night, I received a call from the antique shop owner. Your grandmother called it, she said with a chuckle. She told me this would happen, and she asked me to give you a message if it did. What's the message? I asked, curious. She said, tell them that the greatest inheritance isn't money or property. It's the wisdom to use them wisely. And remind them that family isn't just about blood, it's about character. I thanked her and hung up, feeling a mix of emotions. Sadness for what my siblings had become, gratitude for Grandma's wisdom, and determination to honor her legacy. The next few weeks were a whirlwind of activity as the attorney and I worked to implement the terms of the trust. My older brother and sister, faced with legal and financial reality, began the process of liquidating their ill-gotten gains. Their social media posts changed from celebrations of wealth to vague statements about life's unexpected challenges. As for me, I focused not on the money or property I was receiving, but on understanding Grandma's true legacy, the values she had lived by, and the lessons she had tried to teach all of us. And I began to formulate a plan for how I would use my inheritance to honor those values. The next month passed in a blur of legal proceedings and asset transfers. My older brother and sister, defeated and humiliated, complied with the terms of the trust, liquidating their purchases and returning the funds to the estate. Their social media profiles went dark, and they stopped responding to my calls and texts. I heard through mutual acquaintances that they were both struggling financially, trying to figure out how to live without the extravagant lifestyle they had briefly enjoyed. Meanwhile, I worked closely with the attorney to understand the full scope of what Grandma had left me. It was far more than I had ever imagined, not just in monetary value, but in the opportunities it provided to make a difference in the world. One afternoon, as we were reviewing the property holdings, the attorney handed me a letter that had been filed with the trust documents. Your grandmother asked me to give you this when you were ready, he said softly. She wrote it during her final weeks when she knew what was coming.
I opened the envelope with trembling hands, recognizing Grandma's elegant script immediately. "My dear," the letter began, "if you're reading this, it means my plan has worked, and you're now in possession of more resources than you ever imagined. I'm writing this not to explain the trust, you'll understand that soon enough, but to explain my hopes for how you'll use what I've left you." She went on to describe her vision for how I might honor her legacy. She suggested using a portion of the inheritance to establish a foundation in her name, focused on supporting education for underprivileged children, a cause she had always been passionate about. "I've always believed that education is the great equalizer," she wrote. "It gave me the tools to build a life for myself and my children after your grandfather passed. I want to give others that same opportunity." She also suggested that I consider preserving some of her properties rather than selling them all, particularly the small apartment building where she had gotten her start in real estate. "That building represents more than an investment to me," she explained. "It represents resilience, hope, and the belief that with hard work and determination, anyone can build a better life. I hope you'll keep it as a reminder of where we came from." As for the rest of her assets, she left the decisions to me,
With only one condition. "Use these resources in a way that brings you joy and purpose," she wrote. "Don't let them become a burden or a source of conflict. Remember that wealth is a tool, not an end in itself, and its greatest value comes from what you can do with it to help others." Tears streamed down my face as I read her final words. "I'm sorry that your siblings chose the path they did. I hope that one day they'll understand the true meaning of family and integrity. But know this, my dear, you were always the grandchild who understood me best. Your kindness, your integrity, and your genuine love for others have always been your greatest strengths. Never lose those qualities, no matter how much wealth you accumulate. They are your true inheritance." I folded the letter carefully, my heart full of love and gratitude for the woman who had planned so meticulously to protect me and guide me, even from beyond the grave. Over the following months, I began to implement Grandma's vision. I established a foundation for educational excellence, named after my grandmother, and began working with local schools to identify students who needed financial support to pursue their educational goals. I also decided to keep the apartment building where Grandma had started her real estate journey. I spent weekends there, getting to know the tenants and learning about their lives. Many of them were struggling to make ends meet, working multiple jobs to support their families. They reminded me of Grandma, resilient, hardworking, and full of hope for the future. One of the tenants, an elderly woman, became a particular friend. She had lived in the building for over 40 years and had known Grandma well. "She was a special lady, your grandmother," she told me one afternoon as we shared coffee in her small apartment. "She never raised the rent on us, even when the neighborhood got fancy. She said a home should be a sanctuary, not a source of stress." As I listened to her stories, I began to understand more deeply the values that had guided Grandma's life: generosity, integrity, and a genuine concern for others' well-being. These were the true inheritance she had left me, far more valuable than any monetary asset. 6 months after Grandma's passing, I received a call from my sister. She sounded hesitant, almost ashamed. "I know I have no right to ask, but could we meet? There's something I need to say." We agreed to meet at a small coffee shop near my new apartment. When she arrived, I barely recognized her. The designer clothes and expensive jewelry were gone, replaced by simple jeans and a t-shirt. She looked tired, but there was something different in her eyes, a humility that hadn't been there before. "I'm sorry," she said as soon as we sat down, "for everything. My brother and I were so focused on what we thought we deserved that we lost sight of what was right." She went on to explain that the past few months had been difficult but eye-opening. Without the cushion of Grandma's money, they had both been forced to reevaluate their priorities and choices. "I've been thinking a lot about Grandma lately," my sister continued, "and I realize now that she was trying to teach us something all along. We just weren't listening." My sister's confession marked the beginning of a slow but meaningful reconciliation within our family. My brother, initially resistant, eventually reached out as well, his pride softened by the consequences of his actions. Our relationships would never be the same, but there was a possibility of something new, something more honest and authentic.
As I settled into my new life, I found myself thinking often about Grandma's final words to me. They are your true inheritance. I began to understand that the greatest gift she had left me wasn't the money or the properties,
but the opportunity to live a life guided by purpose and integrity. The foundation for educational excellence quickly became my primary focus. We awarded our first scholarships that spring, and attending the recipient's high school graduation was one of the most meaningful experiences of my life. Seeing those young people, full of hope and determination, reminded me of Grandma, of her belief in the power of education to transform lives. One recipient in particular, a young woman who would be the first in her family to attend college, wrote me a letter that I keep on my desk to this day. "Thank you for this opportunity," she wrote. "I promise to make the most of it, not just for myself, but for my family. Your grandmother must have been an incredible person to create something like this. I hope to make her proud." Reading those words, I felt a connection to Grandma that transcended time and space. Her legacy was living on through these students, through their dreams and achievements. The apartment building became another source of purpose and fulfillment. I worked with the tenants to make improvements to the building, always consulting them about their needs and preferences. We created a community garden in the backyard, a small library in the lobby, and a monthly potluck dinner that brought everyone together. The elderly tenant became an unofficial advisor, helping me understand the building's history and the needs of its residents. She often shared stories about Grandma's early days as a landlord, painting a picture of a young woman navigating challenges with determination and grace. She had a way of making everyone feel valued, she told me one day as we watched children playing in the garden. That's her real legacy, you know, not the money or the properties, but the way she made people feel seen and respected. As the first anniversary of Grandma's passing approached, I decided to host a small memorial gathering at her favorite park. I invited my older brother and sister, as well as the elderly tenant and several of the foundation's scholarship recipients. It felt important to bring together the different parts of Grandma's legacy, family, community, and the next generation of students whose lives would be transformed by her generosity. The day was perfect, sunny and mild, with a gentle breeze rustling the leaves of the old oak trees where Grandma and I used to have picnics. As we gathered around a simple bench that I had dedicated to her memory, I found myself reflecting on the incredible journey of the past year. "I've been thinking a lot about what Grandma would want us to remember about her," I said to the group. "I think she'd want us to remember that the greatest wealth isn't measured in dollars, but in the positive impact we have on others' lives." My brother nodded, his expression thoughtful. "She always said that the best investments are in people, not properties." "And she believed in second chances," my sister added softly. "I think that's why she structured her will the way she did, not just to protect you, but to give us a chance to learn from our mistakes." One of the scholarship recipients, a young man, spoke up. "I never met your grandmother, but from everything you've told us, she sounds like someone who understood that education is about more than just getting a degree. It's about becoming a better person." As we shared stories and memories, I felt Grandma's presence strongly, not as a ghost or a memory, but as a living legacy in the values we shared and the connections we were forming. Later that afternoon, as I was packing up to leave, the elderly tenant approached me with a small box. "I found this when I was cleaning out my apartment," she said, handing it to me. "Your grandmother gave it to me years ago and told me to hold on to it until the time was right. I think that time is now." Inside the box was a simple silver locket. When I opened it, I found a tiny photo of Grandma on one side and a message engraved on the other. "The greatest inheritance is a life well lived." Tears filled my eyes as I fastened the locket around my neck. It was the perfect final piece of Grandma's treasure hunt. Not a clue leading to more money or property, but a reminder of what truly matters. In the years that followed, I continued to honor Grandma's legacy through the foundation and the apartment building, but also in smaller, more personal ways. I spent time with the scholarship recipients, offering guidance and support as they navigated college and careers. I maintained the apartment building not just as an investment, but as a community, ensuring it remained a place where people could build better lives for themselves and their families. My older brother and sister both found their paths to redemption. My brother through volunteer work with financial literacy programs, helping others avoid the mistakes he had made, and my sister through a career in social work, driven by a desire to make a positive difference in people's lives. Our family relationships healed slowly, built on a new foundation of honesty and mutual respect. We never returned to the easy familiarity of our childhood, but we found something more authentic, a recognition of our flaws and a commitment to supporting each other's growth. Sometimes, on quiet evenings, I sit in Grandma's favorite armchair, which I moved from her house to my apartment, and I think about her final message to me. The greatest inheritance is a life well lived. It's a lesson she taught not through words, but through the example of her own life, a life of integrity, generosity, and unwavering commitment to her values. As I look toward the future, I know that the real treasure Grandma left me wasn't the money or the properties, but the opportunity to live a life of purpose and meaning, to honor her legacy by making a positive difference in the world, one person at a time. And in that, I know she's still with me, guiding me, cheering me on, and reminding me that the greatest wealth we can accumulate is the love we give and the lives we touch along the way.